Hello, everybody. We are back with our next video in the viewer question and answer series, and we're going to Illinois, or we're in Illinois today with Desiree. And you are a stay-at-home mama with two littles, which is busy, busy, busy.
Yes, and with all the COVID and everything, I thought this would be like a great time. Like, we're gonna get to spend so much time at home and enjoy each other. And now it's like, I wish we could go somewhere. And
I know, to the park or something. It'll come another couple months.
Yeah. Yes, we're anxiously awaiting that.
That's awesome. When I first started in high school working at the funeral home, there was only two of us really, for the most part, that worked there on alternating, and her name was Desiree.
Really?
Everybody, we called her Desi. So I think that is the only other person I've ever known with that name. So
yep. Everyone in high school called me that.
It's the perfect shortening.
Yeah, my husband and I, we went to high school together, and so he still calls me Des, but I've tried to phase everybody out that calls me that because I don't love it.
You're like, I'm a woman now. Like, let's,
yes.
You know? That's funny. Well, what is your first question for me?
My first question, I have always, I don't know where I heard this from, but I've heard it over the years multiple times, that there's like a light on at the funeral home if there's like a body present.
Oh.
And I have noticed at our local funeral home, sometimes the curtains are drawn and there's a lamp on at night. Sometimes there's not. And I had asked a question like, why is somebody there like working? And because it's just one small little lamp. It's not like the whole place is lit up.
Yeah.
Always wondered about that, and someone had told me, well, that means they've got someone and they're preparing someone for a funeral. I'm like, I don't know about that, but is that a true thing? Or
first of all, I think you need to just call and ask them at your funeral home to find out. But no, I don't know any routine like that. I'm gonna bet there is a funeral home somewhere that they kind of mark it by something like that. I could see them doing that, but usually like any business, there'll be like one light that people leave on at night, or the opening and closing of the curtains. I wonder where that window is in the chapel.
It's in like the main office building. Well, I job shadowed at this funeral home in high school, and then it's owned by different people now, but then it was like the main secretary's office, and it was always, sometimes they were drawn and the light was on and sometimes not, and I don't know what it is since it's changed hands, but that's what it was.
Yeah, I could see it being the opposite, where the light would be on and the curtains open if no one was there, but closed and the light off if there's a casket. If that was like the chapel, I would guess just whoever's working makes the decision if they leave it off or on, but you should call them and ask them.
Hey, why do you have your light on? Like,
yeah, why is it on sometimes and not off? Is there any correlation to anything? And they'll be like, oh, we didn't even realize, like when.
I feel like I already creep out this funeral director though, because he's our local guy.
Yeah.
And so for both of my grandmothers, like I try not to go up and ask a lot of questions, but like I find myself talking to him a little bit more. Yeah. And he's friends with my father-in-law. And so I also kind of worry, like he thinks I'm a weirdo, and he probably avoids me at every visitation I attend. And
I've noticed the curtains open and the light is on. And while I was out in my car with my binoculars watching, you're going to have a restraining order by the end of
right. I so ask though.
Oh, I love it. So what's your second question?
My second one, at my grandmother's funeral just a couple of weeks ago, I had noticed, now I notice all these little things just from watching your videos.
Yeah.
I noticed like her mouth was kind of crooked when we were at her viewing. It was kind of like one side was like pinched tighter than the other kind of. And I wondered like if that, like from a funeral director's point of view, if you noticed that and saw that like something was off, then why not fix it? But at the same time, then I'm trying to think like back at videos that I've watched from you saying like, I don't know what they started with. Maybe they worked really hard on that and I don't know.
Yeah.
And that sort of anything, but
How
I
did
just noticed it.
how did she die?
She had COPD. She died at home. She was 87, but she didn't have like the tube in her mouth or anything that
Yeah,
would make her mouth droop. And
that's
that was
always
my
going to be my
question. I'm like,
first
why does
question.
it look like that if she didn't have that? But she
Yeah.
had an oxygen, but it was just a nasal cannula.
Yeah, so to explain kind of what Desiree is talking about. So sometimes when somebody's in the hospital and they have like a breathing tube in through their mouth, which is a decent sized tube. And so this side of your mouth is basically propped open for an extended period of time. This part will get almost stretched to that. So then this part of your mouth is almost like it's a little stretched out and may droop from the pressure of that tube hanging. What also happens is this area may also dehydrate. And so we'll sometimes get individuals that have had that tube in for a long period of time, and it gets like almost hard and crusty because it's that dried out. It's like chapped, almost like it's died and hardened up. And so trying to rehydrate doesn't always work. And sometimes when they will close the mouth, I've seen where they over close and they try and tuck that in when they glue the mouth so you don't see it. And so they're actually painting outside of your lip, the upper and the lower, because that's what's actually you see, because they've tried to tuck the rest of it. I would guess it was just a bad mouth closure. There are some funeral directors who are so good at closing mouths and eyes, and they really take time to make sure the inner canthus, am I right, of the eye, which is where that little bump is, that is sealed. You don't want your eye closed, but that be open. It looks weird on a deceased. It's like there's a hole like peeking into the eyeball. So there's some directors who don't even look at that and they just seal up the eye, and you got one eye kind of coming up and one eye slooping. And, we learn in school the ratios of the face, where things are supposed to line up. Your eyelid is not in the middle of your eye. It's down towards the lower. So, but some people do it where your eyelid's up in the middle and it looks weird. So there's all these little nuances to setting features. And there's some people who just do it so quick and then they move on when this is what people see. So if this is messed up, it doesn't matter if the body is well preserved. They're going to see this and be like, oh, what did they do? That's a bad embalming. They can, and that mouth, they just over seal one side and don't get the nice natural lip line. And then you get that weird off balance. It can be fixed. Mm-hmm. You can open that mouth and completely reglue it, even at visitation. So I'm not saying this is what you should have done, because who knows what the situation, but it's always worth saying, her mouth isn't quite right. After visitation tonight, could you try to get her lip line better? And you can always ask. Yes, it is going to hurt somebody's ego doing it, but I would rather a family ask and say, is there anything you can do because it's not quite right? And just ask the question. The worst they're going to say is no, not at this point, but at least you asked, and at least they understand that maybe something wasn't quite up to snuff. But there's nice ways. My nose is tickly today. There's nice ways of doing it without being too insulting or
right,
claiming or attacking the person, but just saying, hey, could you do it? And not expecting it. They might not be able to do it right then, because it means they have to open the whole mouth and redo all the makeup around the mouth and stuff. So they may not be able to do it right then, but it's worth asking. Right. So that was my long answer to your question.
That's okay. I figured it would probably just be like something simple.
And it's hard. It is one of those things without seeing, without knowing, it's just best guessing. But I can see it just being as simple as maybe they just overglued that side when they did it. Because it's
and he's such a nice guy. I didn't want to be like, hey, that doesn't look right to me. Because I've been to other funerals and visitations that he does, and he does a wonderful job. So I hated to even critique anything, because I know he does an awesome job. And
yeah,
it was just something, because she's my grandma, so I know what she looks like. Whereas like maybe someone that didn't see her recently might not have noticed.
Right. Yeah, we're more critical of people that we know and we've stared at and loved. But even then, it's hard to sometimes, even looking at somebody all the time, you don't see some of those nuances until the muscles are completely relaxed and something's steady. Like I talk to the one side of my mouth. And so naturally, like my lip goes to the side. So if I'm sitting normal and it's all straight, it's not quite as normal. So just for an example, something like that may not look as natural to somebody too as well, but yeah, and when looking at the bottom of people's noses, which, is so disgusting, but you're going to see that part of somebody when they're laying in the casket when you're not used to looking up at somebody's nose and realizing that it's off skewed or one side's bigger than the other. And all these little things you normally would never see on a friend or family member. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, look at that. What is that going on? So, yeah. Well, what's your number 2 question?
That was my number 2 question. We're on number 3 already.
Oh my gosh.
My husband we've been talking since I watch your videos. I ask him all the time, like, what do you want when you die? And he hates it. He's like, I don't want to talk about that. But I'm like, I need to know. What if you die tomorrow? And I don't know.
Yeah.
And he insists that he doesn't want to be buried at the cemetery here in our town, just because he finally told me why the other day. And it was kind of like, well, I always thought I would leave this town and I don't want to be stuck here forever. And so I think that if something were to happen to him, I would bury him down south where his grandparents are. But that's 2 hours away from our house. But I would also want to use our local guy because I know he does a good job. Is that something that I could still do? Heaven forbid, like something happened. Could I still use the local guy and have him buried 2 hours away?
Oh, of course. It's in the same state? It's still in Illinois. So yeah, what would happen is you would just do everything there local and schedule the burial for maybe the next day or something. And you would just set a time that you would meet at the cemetery. They would put somebody in the car, in the hearse to transport him down there and meet at the cemetery for the burial. And as long as you're in the same state, you don't need somebody licensed in a different state. That's why I asked. If say you were going to Georgia or something, you would need a Georgia licensed funeral director to be at the cemetery. So you may find that if it's a small funeral home, they can't afford to have the licensed person drive 2 hours, because then that means if there's only one person, that there's nobody back here in case there's a death or something. They may have a part-time staff member drive down there and may call one of the local funeral homes to have a director come over and oversee the burial. So, your local person will still take care of everything. 2 hours is not that far at all, to drive and meet at 11 and then drive back home. It's, you do it all in one day, and it still would only take probably 6 hours of the day. So definitely easy enough.
I had wondered, like, well, because the town that we live in, the funeral home is like 6 blocks from the cemetery. Yeah. So the funeral procession isn't very long. And so I wondered, like, would we leave the chapel and then have a 2-hour-long drive with funeral procession?
No, it's not safe to go those kind of distances. And even on the highway, it's not very safe. So I always, like, if I have to go on the highway, I'll just tell people to meet there. If I go into any bigger city, I will usually say, let's just meet there, because it's too hard and dangerous for the most part to do some of that. People are just crazy drivers nowadays, and with cell phones, and they don't look. So then your procession's going through and then, oh, good, it's green light, and they just start going. And like, there's just too many new factors in the last 10, 20 years that a lot of people are moving away from some of the processions for safety reasons. But yeah, can't imagine you would go the same day, because of time that you would arrive would be later in the day probably. And they may be, like right now it gets dark so early that you can't like get to a cemetery at 4 or 5 o'clock, because it's too dark to fill the hole at the end. It's not safe for the vault company and everything. So I would imagine you would go the next day to finish and complete that part of it. So did he ask you what you want?
Well, I told him that I'm perfectly fine being buried here and it doesn't bother me. But 5 years ago, I had told him, don't bury me there. I don't want to be there. It's on a highway. And now I've just told him, you know what? Whatever's cheapest for you, that's fine. You want to put me there, it's fine. I don't want to be, he tells me all the time, he's going to do this because it's the one thing I don't want. I don't want to be cremated and scattered in any body of water because I'm terrified of drowning. And that's like my one rule. Like, don't put me in any water.
That's so funny. I think there's a little one coming.
Yeah. What you doing? Hi.
I'll sign off quick before she pops on. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Desiree. Those were really good questions. I love that questions are getting more personal, I feel like, as we're going along, because people are looking for unique questions to ask, but they're coming up because of personal reasons. So I love it. Well, thanks for joining me, and thanks everybody, and watch for us next Sunday to see what state we're in next. Bye.
Bye.